Hello, hello. It's Eileen here, and I've got a quick update that I wanted to be sure to share with you before we dive into today's episode. The Resilience Room membership community is going to open its doors for new members Monday, July 28th through Friday, August 1st. If you've been thinking of joining us and want to be sure to be notified when we open, I want to encourage you to join the waitlist. You can do that at go.eileendivine.com/resilience room. That's go.eileendivine.com/resilience room. We only open our doors for new members a few times per year, so if you've been thinking about joining, this is a great time for you to do that. We would love nothing more than to welcome you into our amazing community. So again, you can find all the details and join the waitlist at go.eileendivine.com/resilience room. Okay, on to the episode. What typically happens when there's a big behavioral issue happening with our child or our teen, all of our energy and emotion and attention is laser focused on how to get that behavior to stop. That's when we reach for our power, which may look like using consequences or threats of consequences, maybe sticker charts or bribes or pleading, maybe shaming or yelling, talking louder, talking faster, forced isolation. You get the picture. I'm going to assume that we've all been there. Hi there, and welcome to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine, and I am a therapist, parent coach, and educator who supports parents that are raising children, teens, and young adults with brain-based differences and challenging behavioral symptoms. If you are a parent or caregiver of a child who has intense, confusing, relentless, or sometimes even scary behaviors, you are in the right place, and I am so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hey, and welcome back to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine. And what I wanted to talk about today, starting from the very beginning here, is one of the most essential things you need to know about your child or teen who lives with a neurobehavioral difference. It is the first step in understanding why they behave the way they do. This information, this theory and foundational understanding is surprisingly simple in theory, and it's rooted in what neuroscience research tells us about the brain and how it functions. So this first step, this first essential step that I'm going to start with all of you today is where I always begin with parents who are working to shift their lens and see their child through a brain first lens. It is foundational in terms of these parents understanding their child and knowing how to help their child be more successful in their various environments. It also establishes a clear why behind this parenting model before we move into the, okay, now what do we do about it? So I understand intimately the wanting to know concretely what to do. We will get there. It's understandable that you may experience this urgency when things are really, really tough in your home. But what I've found time and time again is that if we jump there without establishing the theory and making sure that our foundation there is strong, we always come back to it anyways. We always need to review that. We always need to kind of take 2 steps backwards to do that. So that's just where we're beginning today. The other thing that I think is really helpful about understanding the theory behind brain first parenting is the knowledge that it is rooted in science. So it's not just something I made up or somebody else made up. It really is looking at what neuroscience research teaches us about the brain and behaviors, and then how do we understand a child whose brain works differently based on that. what is really helpful about that information is there are going to be times where you will experience some internal resistance to this model. It happens to all of us. So I can say that really confidently, that you may be like, okay, I'm on board. This resonates with me. This makes sense. And then we hit a certain behavior or a certain situation. You're like, I'm not sure. This behavior, I think it's on purpose. I think it's willful. I think they're just manipulating me, right? So no blame and shame. It's just an opportunity to take a step back, remind ourselves of the science, what we know about this theory being rooted in that science, and then following that path and seeing where it leads us. So this is where I wanted to focus our time together today. So you may have noticed that I said simple in theory. That's because taking this theory that we're going to dive into today and putting it into practice as you parent your child is where the steep learning curve is for 99% of the parents that I've worked with. I say this because, again, I imagine you may get to the end of this episode and say, oh my gosh, okay, what does this mean for my unique child? I understand the theory, but it's generalized to all kids with brain-based differences. I want to know how to make sense of this for my child and what to do so that things can get better, so that my relationship with them can get better. Those are all really great questions, very understandable that you want that information, and we will get there. I promise we will get there. But for now, I want to begin by taking a small step back and focusing on understanding the theory behind parenting from a brain first lens. We always begin with the brain behavior connection. There's all kinds of neuroscience research that tells us that the brain and one's behaviors cannot be separated. Behavior belongs in the brain. This isn't true just for our kids. It is the human experience. It is true for all of us. So what does this mean concretely when you are the parent of a child that's struggling in really big ways behaviorally? It means that when you are met with a challenging behavior, you consider what's happening in that moment with your child's unique brain right alongside it. What could this have to do with the brain? If we don't do this, then we're missing half the story and we're missing the solution to how to help our child settle. We're missing that opportunity to help them experience less challenging behaviors. We'll continue to be at a loss as to why this is happening, whatever that behavior is. Why does it keep happening over and over, no matter what I do? And it will instead help you understand what you can actually do about it. I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know by saying that this is not what we usually do. And I totally get why this is. Nobody teaches us, that's the first thing. Nobody says you must consider the brain right alongside behaviors. The second thing is just the fact, the reality that our society, which we are a part of, is deeply rooted in a behavioral lens, meaning holding the view that behavior is intentional, it's willful, and it is in the complete control of that person at all times. What typically happens when there's a big behavioral issue happening with our child or our teen, all of our energy and emotion and attention is laser focused on how to get that behavior to stop. That's when we reach for our power, which may look like using consequences or threats of consequences, maybe sticker charts or bribes or pleading, maybe shaming or yelling, talking louder, talking faster, forced isolation. You get the picture. I'm going to assume that we've all been there. I refer to it as falling into the behavioral lens pit. And in those moments, when your child's behavior is irritating at best, scary at worst, it's completely understandable to experience that sort of tunnel vision with that behavior being all we can see or think about in that moment. So then what's the alternative, right? That's when we go back to this seemingly simple theory. The alternative that is available for each of us is to learn over time how to fully lean into the neuroscience research about the brain behavior connection and shift our lens to think brain first, behavior second. And step one in thinking brain first is to recognize that the brain and behaviors are always connected. This then leads us to the fact that when the brain has been impacted in some way, we will see behaviors that reflect that brain difference, and we need to consider both equally to get the full picture. It's leaning into the fact that a brain that is impacted works differently, which means the child who has the brain that works differently may not have some fairly basic cognitive skills that we typically assume a child of that given age has firmly in place. We don't even consider it. It also means that that child with that brain-based difference navigates the world very differently than anyone expects, which means that there are seemingly easy tasks and expectations that come up every single day for them, all day long, that they constantly are bumping up against because they don't have the cognitive skills developed yet to complete that task or meet that expectation. It also means that they then experience these defensive behaviors, the behavioral symptoms, because the environment doesn't recognize their need for accommodations. It's not considering brain alongside those behaviors. There's no additional understanding. Those defensive behaviors are a reflection of that child's chronic frustration, their pain, their distress. It's them communicating, this environment is not working for me. Behaviors are the symptoms of a brain-based difference. If we focus on the brain and how to support a child's unique brain, those symptoms begin to calm down. That's it. The simple in theory, a bit more complicated in practice, but the theory behind brain first parenting. The implementation of this theory, I want you to hear this loud and clear. It does get easier over time. I'm looking forward to using this podcast as a way to support you in the practice of implementing this theory and applying it to your unique child and their unique brain. Because that's where the transformation begins and where things finally, over time, begin to get better. Hey, I was hoping I could ask for a really quick favor before we say goodbye. If you enjoy this podcast and you find the information that I have to share valuable to you as a parent or a provider, I would really appreciate if you took just a few minutes to provide this podcast with a 5-star review and a quick comment with how this information has positively impacted you. It is the number one way for me to reach more parents like you and I, that could really use some hope and some support as they continue to do their best to parent their child who lives with a brain-based difference and challenging behavioral symptoms. Thanks so much.